Well, so much to talk about with my next guest, Doug Blair. He's the author of the Blair Broadcast Substack. He's also a polling analyst, and he joins me on the phone right now. Doug, welcome to the program.
Hello, Corey, and a happy Columbus Day to you as well.
Happy Columbus Day. We are celebrating here in the studio. There is salami as far as the eye can see. Hey, Kevin's giving me the two fingers. Hey, acapulco. All right, so I want to play a little bit of audio from Shannon Bream this week. She had Tim Walz on her Sunday morning Fox News show, and the topic of the Electoral College came up because last week it was reported Tim Walz was in Seattle, Washington, and later Sacramento, California, speaking to donors and Gavin Newsom, how he would prefer the Electoral College to be abolished altogether. Shannon Bream pressed him on that this weekend.
You did once refer to red areas on a map as, quote, mostly rocks and cows. But the founders clearly wanted to protect voices in those areas. Do you not?
Yeah, well, the rest of that quote that they cut off was, I said that includes my mom and my family. Look, my point,
who, by the way, his family endorsed Donald Trump.
On this is right. People feel, and they have to feel, every vote counts in every place of the country. And I think what the point was on this is they see us in battleground states and not across the country. So the campaign's position is clear on this. That's not to get rid of the Electoral College, but it's to focus on every vote. And I think your viewers out there listening want to see these campaigns in every corner talking to every person. And look, as a rural guy, that's, again, you know how politics goes, cut off the back part of this. My point being on that is those are areas that need to be heard.
So abolishing the Electoral College is not a position of the campaign, he says. It is, however, his position. He would be, if elected vice president, God forbid, a heartbeat away from the presidency, is pretty close to power. So, Doug Blair, what would eliminating the Electoral College actually do to America?
Well, as I wrote on my Substack, this would be tyranny. I mean, this would be the institution of a rule by the cities, the urban dwellers, over the rest of the country. In my research, it's very basic. If you look up, places like New York City have more population than several states in the Midwest. And I think that the founders were very prescient and they were very intelligent when they drafted the system that we use to elect our leader, that they didn't want the people in places like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, the places that had all these people that basically exclusively vote for one side, to be in charge of the country. The Heritage Foundation did some really great research on this. They have found that over time, the swing states that we consider to be pretty set have actually shifted multiple times because as the parties adjust, and as people adjust throughout the states, they have different needs. City dwellers pretty consistently vote for Democrats. Therefore, if you were to say you are the ones who decide who gets to choose or who is in power, we would have Democratic rule forever. And I think that that's problematic because obviously we've seen how much of a failure this current administration has been. But when people are given unchecked power and basically don't have any reason to run in support of rural people or in people that don't agree with them, they just say these people aren't worth it and they ignore them. And we've seen that in certain states too. My home state of Oregon, Portland, Oregon is basically the only determinant of who has power in that state. And it reflects really badly on the people who live out in the rural counties because their voices are not heard. So just take that on a state level and expand that out to the country, and you can see how awful that would be.
Yeah, I can see that. Obviously, the large population centers, the cities, they're Democrat-run. The presidential candidates will campaign on promises of making the subway system or the metro system more affordable. They'll talk about green energy and all that. But in the farmland in Wyoming or Nebraska, the policies of them will be just forgotten about, I don't know, just rural roads, for example. They have to drive everywhere they got to go to. Farming, it would place a much less emphasis on the issues that rural Americans care about. But what do you say to the leftists who say, well, as it stands now, a vote in Wyoming is worth a hell of a lot more than a vote in New York City. How is that fair if every American is equal? How would you respond to that?
Well, it is fair in the sense that it means that every American's voice matters, right? Like we've been saying over and over again, the voice of the urban dweller should not matter more than the voice of the rural person,
Right.
both for pragmatic reasons in the sense that the needs of the city are very different than the needs of the rural voter. And if you are only catering to one side of the aisle, of course, you're not going to cater to those people that desperately need that rural help. But secondarily, this is the system that I always find so frustrating that people start to rail against, right? Hillary Clinton, back in 2016 when she lost and she said the system was rigged and that she'd won the popular vote, this was the system that they'd gone in knowing. I mean, the election has never been otherwise. It's always been
Right.
based on the Electoral College. So if you claim it's unfair, I mean, you should change your strategy. You should
Probably
change
visit Wisconsin.
how you go out there.
Yeah.
Right. You should visit Wisconsin. You should visit the Rust Belt. You should not assume that those places are going to go for you just because you're Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump has made this point too, where he said, if this was a popular vote, I would have campaigned differently. I wouldn't have gone to these places necessarily because I would have had no incentive to. And I think that that resonates with people, whereas the people in New York say this is unfair. The people in Wyoming say this is the only way our voices are heard. So I would respond in that sense, like maybe you should make your policies a little bit more palatable to both sets of people, as opposed to just saying only New Yorkers get my attention. They're the only people that matter.
Right. And it starts with the Electoral College, and I don't ever see it ending there because, I mean, the entire system of our government is set up with, you know, the presidency and the Senate and the House, and checks and balances, obviously. But if each state currently has 2 senators, which obviously they do, what's to say their next step wouldn't be that California should be getting 50 senators and Wyoming maybe 1? It upsets the entire system altogether.
You are literally predicting the future here. This is exactly what they're trying to target. There are calls from large Democratic officials that say that the Senate is undemocratic. And I mean, they're not wrong because that's kind of the point, right? So you have the 2 bodies, the checks and the balances that balance out the power of democracy, which is in the House, right? Every single person gets to vote for this thing, and then the districts are based off of population centers, and the Senate is based off of the states, right? So New York and Wyoming both get 2 senators because it's the idea that the states should have equal power. Again, I'm not hearing concerns about why this is unfair. I'm hearing concerns about why Democrats are losing. And this is not necessarily to say that there's no way for them to do this. As you can remember very recently, back in the South, that was a Democratic stronghold for many, many years, and it all of a sudden became more Republican as Democrats began to abandon the rural voters in favor of the urban ones. So this is not something that is permanently structured in such a way that Democrats will always lose. I find it fascinating, though, that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and all of these people would much rather say, forget the system, it's terrible, we should just burn it all down, than say, hey, maybe we should actually appeal to voters in the Rust Belt. Maybe we should actually say things like, hey, you know, I understand that your way of life is under attack by these urban dwellers, and I want to make sure that you're protected, right? One of the things that I think is so fascinating is you mentioned the metro system. Who cares about the metro system is the urban dwellers, but who cares about cars is the rural dweller. And all of these policies from Democrats are about getting rid of gas cars. Right. That's one of those things they could get rid of right now and also start to maybe impact their showing in rural states.
Right, exactly. There's probably no chance this goes anywhere, correct? I mean, this would have to go through the House and the Senate to vote on this. It seems just like a scapegoat for their potential future loss. It's what Hillary Clinton blamed on too. This doesn't have any potential of actually being enacted, does it, Doug Blair?
Well, Corey, I mean, I don't want to frighten you, but there is actually some potential for a subversion of the Electoral College through what is called the National Interstate Voter Compact. This is a series of Democratic states and the District of Columbia that have all gotten together and said, if we all have enough Electoral College votes, if we make it past 270, we will put this thing into effect where our state will vote for the candidate who won the national popular vote, regardless of what the citizens of our own state said. So let's say, for example, Wyoming signs on to this thing. They're not going to, but let's say that they did. Even if the majority of Wyomingites wanted Donald Trump or the Republican to be president, if the Democrat got the national popular vote, Wyoming's electors would go to the Democrat in complete disgust and pushing off of the will of the voters of that state. This is the end goal of the Democrats. If you look at the list of states that have signed on to this compact, it is all Democrats. And
yeah,
I think that
I see it now. There's There's currently 17 states. I'm reading your piece: Maryland, New Jersey, Illinois, Hawaii, Washington, Massachusetts, Vermont, California. It goes on, but they're all Democratic states. But as it stands right now, how would this pact ever become law? They currently have vowed right now to give their electoral votes to the popular vote winner, but how would it ever become official that that's what they'd do?
Well, so the Constitution doesn't actually have any particular way to dictate where electors go. Electors basically are determined by the state's governments to who they vote for. Generally speaking, and I would say democratically, if we're going to actually use that vocabulary, Democrats, you would say that the voters of the state decide who wins that election, right? You would say, well, if, majority of Wyomingites want Donald Trump to be president, we would send electors that would reflect that. If this was to go into effect, there's nothing constitutionally that bars it from saying, oh, well, the voters of our state said one thing, but the state government said another, therefore we are going to send a Democratic slate of electors. I will say this: Heritage Foundation, a lot of the legal organizations that I've been working with here in the district have said that this is constitutionally dubious because there is actually a sense that states cannot enter into agreements and concords and pacts with each other without the consent of Congress. Mm-hmm. However, again, that's depending on the Justice Department. That's depending on the guy in charge in the White House. If they're going to pursue this, let's say that the Congress goes towards the Democrats and they say, yeah, well, we're not really going to pursue this. We're going to say that the states have the permission to do it. Right. That's the danger here. Right. If Democrats are able to gain power, they are able to push this through.
And get Supreme Court justices. Yeah, and get Correct. Supreme Court justices through. All right, Doug, this is more of a threat than I initially thought about. I was like, this is just some far-fetched pie-in-the-sky plan for them. But they're already making plans and enacting on them for a potential for this happening in the future. While I have you, Doug, I know you're a polling analyst and you follow politics really closely. How would you assess the race as it stands right now? I see, Tim Walz is on his man tour right now. Do you think his man tour is winning over male voters like yourself?
Well, look, I mean, it's so funny to me that Tim Walz seems to be the icon of masculinity that the Democrats have put forward, him and Doug Emhoff. So I guess the message for men is if you beat up your baby mama and you fake your military service, that's what makes you a real man. Yeah. If you're asking what the polls are saying, it is showing very clearly that men of all demographics, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, are all shifting towards Donald Trump on that point that the Democrats don't really know what to do with men. They don't quite understand how to appeal to them. So I'm sure you've seen this ad that came out recently, I'm man enough to vote for Kamala Harris, where a bunch of very strange, very obviously faking it liberal men are trying to say, well, I'm cool and I'm a man and I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. And it just comes off as really fake. And that's going to cause a problem because if men in Georgia, if men in Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania decide, I'm not with this, I think Kamala Harris is going to destroy this country, and they shift to Trump, even 1 or 2% of that voting bloc shifting in that direction means Trump wins those states, and that means that he gets back into the White House. So this is a very serious threat for Democrats that I just do not think they're taking seriously.
It doesn't seem to be because Tim Walz blew it off today. He says he doesn't believe it. Kamala Harris says it's not the data that she's seen. So as opposed to facing reality and doing something about it, they just will rather pretend that it doesn't exist. Jim Clyburn was on the morning shows today saying, well, yeah, it is a problem. He is perhaps being a bit more honest about it. And on the reverse side of it, Donald Trump, polling shows that he is struggling a bit with the female vote, at least compared to 4 years ago and 8 years ago. He has a town hall coming up with Fox News. It's October, I think, 16th, 2 days from now. What should Donald Trump focus on during this policy discussion to really win over the women vote?
Look, I mean, I think that the problem is going to be that the biggest issue facing women right now, or at least the biggest issue that the polls are showing that women care about, is abortion, which is an issue that is relatively weak for Republicans right now. So what I think he should be doing is saying, look, abortion is a topic that we could broach. I'm going to say that my position is this. We give back to the states, or whatever he wants to settle on. And then he shifts in the direction of safety. This is another issue that we've seen throughout previous election cycles that have been really impactful for women, specifically suburban women who are mothers who have children. It's unsafe for your child to go out in public these days based on the criminality. I'm sure you saw the interview that J.D. Vance did, I believe, with ABC, where she tried to say that it was only a couple of apartment complexes in Aurora that had been taken over by Venezuelan migrants. And he basically said, listen to yourself. This is insanity. I think that plays really well with people that are concerned about the direction of the country when they say, wow, foreign gangs are taking over apartment complexes in major American cities. I don't know if I'm comfortable allowing somebody who's in charge who thinks that that's not actually a problem. So I think he needs to settle on something with abortion. He needs to basically say, I hear your concerns, we're going to deal with this, but then also shift in a direction that's more powerful for him, that's more strong for him, which is security, safety, immigration, crime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what women, I believe, I speak as not a woman, but I believe they care about safety. I'm mansplaining right now. And also the fact that, men are invading women's safe spaces when it comes to sports, when it comes to locker room. If you're a girl dad or a girl mom, how the heck can you sit this election out and not vote for Donald Trump, who's going to protect you from predators inside of women's bathrooms? It makes no sense to me, and I think he really, really needs to drive down that point. I'm going to play that Martha Raddatz audio at the other side of this break, but we do have to leave it there. Doug Blair, thank you so much for joining, author of the Blair Broadcast Substack. Please check that out online, and say hi to Katie for me. I know she's expecting any day now.
Will do. Thanks, Corey. See you around.